Okay, thank you very much. We are starting now, let's say, with the part of our program which is in German, apart from the introductions. You're speaking? Okay. No, I'm wrong. It's Marcus. So it's Marcus who's going to speak German. Herman is going to give his talk in English. So Herman Westerink teaches at the University of Vienna, psychology of religion. He is the General Secretary of the International Association for the Psychology of Religion. And his research interests include psychology of religion and philosophical anthropology, psychoanalysis, and ethics in secular society. Herman has published numerous monographies. Well, numerous might be exaggerated, but quite a lot. And I can tell you that they really are worth reading. I'll just mention one because it's very relevant for our discussion today. It's a book which is called A Dark Trace, Sigmund Freud on the Sense of Guilt, and that I think at least is one of the best, and I say one of the best because it's always possible, it's very possible that there are some books that I didn't read on guilt in Freud, but from the books I know, this definitely is the best on the topic. So Herman, I'm very pleased to give you the floor.
Thank you. What I want to do here this afternoon is simply, it's always good to say simply to present my, let's say, reading of Freud on the issue of moral responsibility. My interest in the issue of moral responsibility in Freud's writings has been triggered by a somewhat larger project I've been working on in the past 2 years. A project which originated from a single germ cell, namely a statement in Lacan's seminar on the ethics of psychoanalysis, where he suggests that we can only fully understand the moral problems Freudian psychoanalysis addresses when we recognize the filiation or cultural paternity with certain aspects of Reformation thought. And as a die-hard Calvinist, I was, of course, immediately awake, so to speak. This somewhat surprising remark is situated in the larger context of Lacan's critique of what he names Aristotelian Thomistic moral philosophy, a tradition that he sees continued in ego psychology with its focus on accommodation of societal and political interests by shifting the subject's demand for happiness onto the playground of common welfare and shared norms and values. The human instincts are then constructed in such a way, or conceptualized in such a way, that they are made into the natural law of the realization of harmony, as Lacan writes. And in such a train of thought, a confrontation with the human condition, this again a quotation from Lacan, confrontation with the human condition is avoided. According to Lacan, ego psychologists expect that self-knowledge will help to dissolve inner obstructions that inhibit the right moral behavior. The aim of such psychology is to connect or reconnect the right motivation or motive with the right action. But that doesn't take us very far, says Lacan. It is the kind of self-knowledge that is only interested in the unconscious as far as the decantation of good instincts or useful instincts and motives is concerned. According to Lacan, the true form of self-knowledge can be identified in terms of finding oneself in the responsible position of becoming an analyst of oneself that, in the end, confronts the one who undergoes it with the reality of the human condition. Lacan says. That is to say, the confrontation with desire, its transgression, its abyssal object, and etc. Lacan's position is opposed here to a trend in eco-psychology in the 1950s, to reason that therapy aims at insight and self-knowledge by which one should hold oneself responsible for one's evil wishes in order to be able to reject or control these wishes. In some recent studies on psychoanalysis, ethics, and responsibility, this train of thought has been continued. Moral responsibility is here immediately associated with a degree of mature self-control, willingness to face and accept reality, and to meet obligations and duties. Being responsible for one's desires and impulses enables a person to identify their sources, meanings, and purposes in order to finally renounce or modify them in the interest of greater adaptation and maturity, or to integrate them in more effective and productive ways. I think the relevance of a Freudo-Lacanian view on moral responsibility is exactly to be found in the critique of the immediate association of self-knowledge, moral sensibility, and the adaptation to shared norms or common duties that in our current society are more and more taking the form of shared or individual economic interests. It is this dominance of economic interests, this guidance of people's behavior and choices, that raise fundamental questions such as, why should I be moral? And also seems to intensify attempts to correct behavior by means of a moralizing message of norms and values. It is against this background that I would like to consider Freud's view on moral responsibility as a perspective that focuses on moral insight instead of personal interests, as a deconstruction of what Freud calls hypocrisy. Freud is a clinician and not a scholar in ethics. And nevertheless, he was intrigued by the question of the source and emergence of both individual and societal morality, its key dynamics and its effects. Within this context, he addresses concepts that are central in various ethical theories: happiness and pleasure, constructs of good and evil, duty and the categorical imperative, love of fellow men, moral responsibility, and etc. And yet, despite these topics, he carefully avoids his psychoanalytic theories and practice from becoming an ethical theory itself, in the sense of a critical and systematic reflection of human moral behavior, in order to develop principles of right moral conduct and to organize the relations of human beings. But ethics is more than developing rules of conduct or defining right moral action. It starts with an analysis of motives, perceptions, inclinations, desires, expectations, and the web of authority and power structures that forces itself upon the individual in a demand of obedience or adaptation. At this point, ethical reflection connects with psychoanalysis, I think. Freud is constantly analyzing and re-evaluating aspects of human behavior, disentangling the ambivalences and inner conflicts in such a way that a person may gain insight. Sometimes, such analysis leads to statements about good or evil aspects of human beings, which can lead to rather paradoxical testimonies in Freud's works, such as this one. Ethics, I quote, "Ethics are remote from me. I do not break my head very much about good and evil, but I have found little that is good about human beings on the whole." Freud regularly uses the concepts of good and evil in his analyses of individuals, applying them as seemingly self-evident. An example can be found in his case study of the red man, where Freud states that the contrast between the conscious and the unconscious can be assimilated with the contrast between a moral self and an evil one. In the case of the red man, the unconscious is then simply named evil, since it contains all the repressed affects and perceptions that Freud associates with hatred, sadistic and destructive impulses, and with the red man's selfishness. Yet things are not always that simple. When Freud discusses the low morality of the state and the brutality of man in the first years of the First World War, he criticizes those who defend the idea that moral development consists of eradicating the evil human tendencies and replacing these by good tendencies through education in a civilized environment. He argues that in reality, there is no such thing as eradicating evil, since, strictly speaking, the human impulses in themselves are neither good nor bad. There is no such thing as an evil self. There are only natural instincts which are similar in all people and which aim at the satisfaction of certain needs. Such instincts are only classified as good or evil according to their relation to the needs and demands of the human community, Freud writes. Society categorizes selfish and cruel impulses as evil. As regards man's brutality, Freud reasons that a person's character can only inadequately be classified as good or bad, since a person is either good or bad in specific relations. Most times he is both at the same time in his ambivalences towards important others. Besides, strong bad impulses in early childhood are often the condition for later good inclinations through a sense of guilt. Bad instincts thus cause good behavior. The surfacing of brutality is not only the expression of primitive inclinations. In fact, Freud argues, the innate aspect should not be overestimated. At least as important is the fact that man is misled by culture, including ethical theorists, that regard human beings better than they actually are. Since culture is only interested in good behavior, and does not trouble itself about the instinctual basis of this conduct. Now, these ideas from Thoughts for the Times on War and Death are important, since from then on Freud more often uses quotation marks when he writes of good and evil impulses. Of course, one may ask the question why he still wants to use these concepts of good and evil when the human instincts in themselves are neither good nor bad. An answer is formulated in one of the introductory lectures, written about the same time, that is 1917, the lecture on the censorship of dreams. I quote, "We lay a stronger emphasis on what is evil in men only because other people disavow it and thereby make the human mind not better but incomprehensible. If now we give up this one-sided ethical valuation, that is to say the one-sided evaluation of war as an outburst of brutality and not as the stage of good intentions such as courage or social cohesion, we shall undoubtedly find a more correct formula for the relation between good and evil in human nature." Freud has his reasons for emphasizing evil, namely in order to find a correct formula for the relation between good and evil in human nature. Correct, I believe, can be equated here with truthful. It is opposed to what Freud in his essay on War and Death identifies as hypocrisy and illusion, that is to say, the refusal to recognize evil impulses and the related erroneous optimism expressed in the exaggeration of the capacity of people to adjust to socially acceptable moral standards. It is this estrangement from the instinctual disposition, this refusal. I've already said that Freud, in the case of the Red Man, identifies the unconscious as evil, pointing as his repressed, sadistic, cruel impulses. As regards this repressed evil, Freud tells his patients that he ought not to consider himself responsible for these traits in his character, since these impulses had originated from his infancy and were merely derivatives of his infantile character.